while several human rights organizations and Tamils both in and outside Sri Lanka and a few brave Sinhalese continue to accuse the Sri Lankan government of human rights abuses, the Sri Lankan government continues to ignore these calls for independent investigations and continues to imprison hundreds of thousands of innocent Tamil civilians, including children, elderly, women, and the wounded. They continue to deny these human rights abuses and continue to reject international probes. In August 2006, Action Contre la Femme, a French aid agency, had 17 of their aid workers killed execution style. A shot to the head, which their family members and a lot of witnesses claimed was done by the military. Of the 17 aid workers, 16 were Tamils, 1 was Muslim. The Sri Lankan government has not allowed an independent, that was the only time the Sri Lankan government allowed independent observers to enter the country to investigate that crime. Of the organization, or the group that entered, was called the International Independent Group of Eminent Persons, and this included Mr. Ivan Shearer from the Sydney University. However, this organization threw their hands up in the air on April 2008 and left, saying that their attempts at investigating this crime was hindered by the Sri Lankan government and they could not conduct a proper investigation. Since then, no independent observers or investigators have been allowed into the country. I finish with a quote by the chief of the Sri Lankan monitoring mission, the ceasefire monitoring mission, in August 2006, when the 17 aid workers were found dead and the Sri Lankan government would not allow anyone to enter the area where they were found dead. I have experienced this in the Balkans before. When you are not let in, it's a sign that there's something they want to hide. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Sam. And Sam there drew attention to the calls by the present UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Judge Navi Pillai, for an independent international investigation of war crimes allegations on all sides of this conflict. That's a call which has been backed by the European Union and by individual members of the European Union, including the United Kingdom, I've been glad to note, but not by Australia. And one of the calls that we are making from the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies through the Sri Lanka Human Rights Project that we've started to put on these events is for the Australian government to add its voice to that call. During this evening, we'll be passing round this sample letter to politicians. And there's also a sample letter to newspaper editors attached to it as well, for you to use, if you wish, as a model for your own efforts to draw this to the attention of your representatives. So that's one thing we can certainly do. We've heard a bit there about conditions in these internment camps. One of the concerns which has been raised by Amnesty International, among others, is what are people doing there, being locked up anyway? Why aren't they free to move about? There have been no allegations made against them, certainly none sustained against them, which would justify their continuing detention. They're being held, according to the US State Department, against their own will. And that's a very serious situation in and of itself. We also heard there about some of the inadequate conditions in the camps, and that's another area where this same theme is now coming back to us, that we don't have any reliable account to look to establish the truth about them. So what is being hidden from us, and how worried should we be about that? We just had some news, actually, from Sri Lanka, and I'm afraid it's not good news. The eminent journalist, the editor, J. Tissanayagam, I usually refer to him as Tissa, it's a bit easier. I'm afraid he's been held in detention without charge for over a year, and the news today is he's been sentenced to 20 years in prison for the crime of reporting the truth about what's going on in the conflict zone, as if to emphasize further still the premium on bringing into public attention some of the testimony that Brahmi has brought us, and some of the context that Sam has brought us already in this evening's proceedings. Of course, that also sharpens the challenge to the rest of us to think what we can do to provide at least some hope that on a human basis that we can find an empathetic link to people, our fellow human beings, not discriminating on the basis of what race you're born into or what ethnic group you're born into, but instead to stand up for basic human rights as the birthright of all of us. And a group of people who are very much at the sharp end of those concerns are those who carry out relations between nations,